Today we are adding and subtracting rational numbers. So remember, the number set rational numbers encompasses whole numbers, positives and negatives, integers, fractions, decimals, negative fractions, negative decimals. And so we're going to practice adding and subtracting all of those types of numbers today. What we need to remember is all of our rules for operations with fractions, all of the rules for operations with decimals, and all of the rules for operations with integers, and put them all together today. So the first one that we did together was negative 2 and 5/6 plus 1 and 3/8. The first thing we thought about was our rules with fractions, that we have to have a common denominator. So we rewrote the problem with a common denominator. Then we remembered our rules for adding integers and decided that it was to find the difference in their absolute values, and the one with the greater absolute value will carry the sign over to the answer. So since negative 2 and 20/24 has a greater absolute value than 1 and 9/24, we knew our answer was going to be negative. Then we had to find the difference in their absolute values, which was 1 and 11/24, so our final answer was negative 1 and 11/24. On number 2, we subtracted two negative numbers, and our rule for subtraction with integers was to add the opposite. So we rewrote the problem to where we changed these two negative signs to a positive, and instead of subtracting a negative 6.2, we're going to add a positive 6.2. So negative 7 and 38/100 plus 6 and 2/10. Then we're going to use our rules for adding integers. So the same rules apply to adding decimals that are negative and positive. So we're going to find the difference in their absolute value. The one with the greater absolute value carries the sign. So since negative 7 and 38/100 has a greater absolute value than 6 and 2/10, we knew that our answer was going to be negative. We found the difference in their absolute values, and our answer is negative 1 and 18/100. So now we're going to do these two together. So number 3 was 8 and 1/4 minus negative 5 and 1/3. So the first thing I want to do is apply my rules for fractions, which means I have to have a common denominator. So the least common multiple of 4 and 3 would be 12. So I'm going to rewrite 8 and 1/4 with 12ths. And 5 and 1/3 with 12ths would be 5 and 4/12. And now I want to use my rules for subtracting integers to apply to subtracting mixed numbers with different signs. So instead of subtracting a negative 5 and 4/12, I want to add a positive 5 and 4/12. So instead of subtracting, I'm going to add. Instead of a negative 5 and 4/12, I'm going to change it to a positive 5 and 4/12. So now I'm adding those two mixed numbers, and they're both positive. So 8 and 3/12 plus 5 and 4/12. That's 7/12, and 8 plus 5 is 13, so my final answer is 13 and 7/12. And let's try number 4. Number 4 was subtracting integers, a negative and a positive. So I first need to think about my rules for integers on this one. Instead of subtracting a positive 13.7, I can change that to adding a negative 13 and 7/10. So when I add two negatives, I want to add together those absolute values, because here my rules for adding integers with the same sign was to find the total of their absolute values, and I have the same sign in the end. Think about it as walking backwards, 24 and 15/100 places on the number line, and 13 and 7/10 backwards more. So I'm going to add together 24 and 15/100 plus 13 and 7/10. That's 37 and 85/100. Then since they're both negative, my answer is going to be negative. My final answer is negative 37 and 85/100. So to add and subtract these rational numbers, all you have to do is put together all of your rules for integers and all of your rules for decimals and all of your rules for fractions all together.